Hello and welcome to Grief Seeds, a podcast where you'll find insights, reframings, metaphors, and visualizations, all known as grief seeds, to help you cultivate growth and healing in your life after loss. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I'm an intuitive grief guide and author, and on this show, I'll share insights from my interactions with clients, wise words from fellow grievers, and personal stories from my own life, with the hope that they transform your grief as they have transformed mine. Because even when it doesn't feel like it, we are planting the seeds of growth in the midst of great pain and heartache. Your grief is welcome here. Hi there, grief growers, and welcome to another episode of Grief Seeds. Thank you so much for joining me today. Something that I see really often, and something that I experienced in my own grief after the death of my mother, was this pressure, or even this desire, to be the person that I used to be, to have the same amount of energy that I used to have, to be able to make decisions as quickly or as efficiently as I used to have the same dreams and the same goals, to be able to accomplish things in the exact same way that I used to before. And something that came up pretty starkly and pretty quickly in the aftermath of her death was that I couldn't be that person anymore. I didn't have the same energy. I didn't have the same motivation or the same dreams or the same drive anymore. And I wasn't my old self, which was frustrating. And this is frustrating for a lot of grieving people because, especially if your loss was sudden or tragic, took place in the blink of an eye, there's not a lot of linear time between your old self and the person that grief has forced you to become. It may be 24 hours in which I didn't know a world with loss, and now I do. So our old self is literally within arm's reach a day ago. And even for people who have had a lot of time to anticipatorily grieve, somebody they know is going to die, or a relationship that they know is going to end, there can still be this sense of when the loss happens, I can no longer be the person who was waiting for the loss. I am now a person who has experienced the thing. And because we can remember the people that we used to be, sometimes we put ourselves or others put us under an enormous amount of pressure to return to that person or to that existence, or to have those same abilities or capabilities or even brain capacity. So this is really common for us to put ourselves under this microscope of, why can't I just be the person that I used to be? Why on Wednesday can I not be the same person that I was on Tuesday? And it's because your Wednesday self is carrying the additional weight of grief. Your human self that has experienced the aftermath of loss is experiencing and living in a reality that includes death, divorce, diagnosis, some major loss, is now carrying and holding and walking through life with that additional weight, wearing those glasses. And so that grieving self, the person that you are now, deserves a lot of your compassion and a lot of your patience and your grace. But it's something that is in very short supply, oftentimes, in the aftermath of loss. So when I was working with a collective of grievers, this was probably a year or so ago now, I came up with this prepositional phrase that allows us to give ourselves that compassion, that patience, that grace in the aftermath of loss. And that phrase is, while grieving. And I actually turned this into an excerpt that's featured in one of my books called Your Grief Your Way. And if it's okay with you, I hope it is, I'm actually going to read this excerpt from Your Grief Your Way for you today. When you feel confused, forgetful, overwhelmed, or like you're only going in circles, give yourself grace and mercy. Think about all the tasks you do in a day and add, while grieving, to the end of each. For example, I drove my kids to school while grieving, or I sat through a 2-hour meeting while grieving. Looking at your everyday to-dos through the lens of grieving helps remind you that you are doing everything you used to do before your loss occurred, and now you've got big, unavoidable grief in the mix too. So when you accidentally put your keys in the freezer, you can let yourself off the hook. I misplaced my keys while grieving. And this is from the January 24th entry of Your Grief Your Way. And I wrote this because I was so inspired by or touched by this notion that we should be able to be the people that we are before our loss, and we simply cannot be. It's a reality, it's a life, it's a brain that we can't return to. And that's not to say that we're failing in some way, or that the values we had or the things that matter to us before are irretrievable, because they certainly are, but grief has made us different people. And so allowing ourselves that grace and compassion to be like, I'm walking the dog while grieving. What additional weight has that added for you? Are you afraid now to pass neighbors' houses for fear that they'll come out and talk to you? Is the act of physically walking painful? Are you carrying physical pain after a loss? Is it an unpredictable reality for you now? We used to go walking every single day at 3 o'clock. Now I'm sleeping, I'm tending to the will, I'm figuring out what needs to happen with the funeral home, I'm doing a lot of end-of-life stuff, and we might be lucky if we get out of the house for a walk by 6:30. Yeah, and so there's so much more space and grace to give yourself room to breathe here while grieving, because you are doing the same tasks that you used to do before. You are more or less the same human, operating under the same conditions, doing the same activities. But what is unseen to others, and maybe something that we forget to see for ourselves, is that in every single thing that we do, in brushing our teeth and washing the dishes and going to school and going to work, in sitting in traffic and sitting in meetings, in walking the dog and feeding the cat, all of these things also contain the additional and very heavy and very real weight of being a grieving person in the world. And so as you're sitting at a table with your family or friend group having a meal, you may also be remembering the last time you had a meal before your loss. You might be reminiscing in your head or replaying memories of favorite dishes or of cooking with a loved one or with a partner from a loss or with a child. You might be avoiding conversation that asks, "How are you?" You might be doing additional labor to even chew, to even swallow in the aftermath of loss. And that's really real. You are having a meal while grieving and all that that implies. So whenever you feel like this pressure of, gosh, I just wish that I could be the person that I used to be, and I'm so angry, I'm so frustrated that I can't get back to that reality, that I can't be that person anymore. Yes, it's okay to have that, and you are doing everything that you used to do with the additional, heavy, permanent weight of grief. And so there's a lot of room for self-honoring here. There's a lot of room for self-compassion. You aren't just going to the mailbox to get the mail. You are going to the mailbox to get the mail while grieving. I invite you to take a deep breath in with me here. And out. Oh, my dear grief grower, may you offer yourself compassion, starting with the way that you speak to yourself in your head after loss. It's okay that you can't do what you did before loss. It's okay that you're not the same person that you used to be. It makes sense that that's true for you, that that's real for you. It is real for everyone who has ever grieved. We have stepped across a threshold through a doorway that cannot be unstepped through. So we are irreversibly changed. May you honor and recognize and call to the forefront all of the ways that grief has changed everything that you used to do before, and all the ways that you used to see and define yourself within those places and spaces, whether they're actions related to home or relationships or work or school or play or creativity or simply the mundane of living everyday life. You are allowed to be a person. You have so much permission to be a person who walks through the world carrying the additional weight of grief in tow. And while others may not be able to see it, you can be able to know it and to validate it within your own heart and mind to be true for you, the experience that you're having. So anytime anybody comes at you with that pressure to be someone you used to be and you cannot anymore, you can say out loud or just say to yourself, I am living life now while grieving. Deep breath in here and out. Thank you for joining me today. So that's all for this episode of Grief Seeds. Thank you so much for listening today. You can find additional grief support at shelbyforsythia.com or by following me on social media at shelbyforsythia on Facebook and Instagram. If this podcast helped you in your life after loss, please leave a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And be sure to share Grief Seeds with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for financially keeping this podcast on the air. If you'd like to support Grief Seeds on Patreon through a yearly or monthly pledge, you can do so at patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. My Patreon supporters get access to behind-the-scenes content, including a once-a-month grief support call with me and 5 90-minute workshops with topics decided by grievers themselves. Again, that website is patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. Music for Grief Seeds is performed by Addie Goldstein. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you today. I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.